Hello and welcome to another devlog for, well, we're still working on the name of the game. The game we're making is a 3D adventure game taking place in a post-apocalyptic version of Sweden, where the apocalypse has caused mutations to wildlife and extreme weather conditions. It is a narrative-driven experience with gameplay that consists of a balance between platforming and combat. In this devlog, we'll talk a bit about the development of the platforming and combat prototype so far. For the movement, we started with a basic movement controller. When making this controller, we had to choose between two of the engine's different built-in features to use for the movement. We could either use a rigid body, meaning that it would be more physics-based, or we could use the character controller, which is not as physics-based and more or less just moves an object through space, but still handles collision. In our case, we went with the character controller. Although we would not be able to do advanced physics simulations with the player character, the character controller gives us more control over how the character actually moves, which is pretty important for us since movement is a big part of platformers. In the beginning, all you could do was walk, run and jump. But even in this stage, we had some mechanics focused on the game feel, such as a variable jump height, input buffer for the jump, and acceleration. This is very important to make the movement in a game feel responsive. Making it so that the player can control the jump height by holding the button for a varying amount of time gives the player much more control over how the character moves. And having an input buffer for the jump, which means that the game remembers the input for a short amount of time after pressing it, makes it so that the player doesn't need to press the button exactly when the character touches the ground, but could be a little bit early and still be able to execute the jump. At this stage of development though, it didn't really add that much, but it made a big difference later. After implementing the basic movement, we started working on some other movement mechanics, like a grappling hook to grapple to certain grapple points. We discussed two different types of grappling, either letting the player swing from the grapple point, or getting transported to the grapple point and then getting a boost to keep moving forward. We decided to go with the boost one since we thought it would be easier to implement, especially considering that our movement isn't physics-based. But who knows, maybe we'll add a swing mechanic later. We also implemented some early visuals for the player character and the grappling hook, and made a balancing mechanic, because why not? The balancing will probably mostly be used in more cinematic parts of the game. At this point, the movement felt a bit stiff though. What was missing was a sense of weight to the character. To achieve this, we started adding momentum by having acceleration and deceleration that would vary depending on if you were on the ground, in the air, moving in a direction, or trying to stand completely still. This really helped in giving a sense of weight and made it, in my opinion, more fun to control. We also added wall running, because it's cool. Wall running was actually something we had thought of for a while before this point, but after having a playtest where multiple people said, oh, it feels like I should be able to wall run here, we kinda had to add it. So at this point we had a bunch of different mechanics and calculations in order to make the movement feel nice. But it still felt very floaty and not very satisfying to control. Luckily, we have a bunch of different values and numbers that influence the movement that we could play with in order to, hopefully, get the feeling that we want. And after changing some values, and with some updated animations, the movement feels much better. For the combat, we started with a fairly simple prototype, where all you could do was two different attacks. However, we did have some important aspects of our combat already in this prototype, such as the player moving towards the enemy when attacking. Some important systems for developing the combat were also there, like the hitbox and hurtbox system and the weapon assets. The hitboxes and hurtboxes are the components that are responsible for detecting if something was hit by something else. If one object should be able to get hit, it has a hurtbox on it that marks where it can be hit. If a hitbox then overlaps with a the hurtbox is hit, which means that something happens, which in most cases is taking damage. The information about the attacks in the game is stored in different weapon assets. For example, there's an asset for the player's weapon, which contains all of the possible attacks that the player can do. For every attack, information about, for example, the attack's movement, damage, knockback, and hitboxes is stored, and can be changed when editing the asset. One important goal of this approach is to make it as easy as possible to create new attacks, which requires a good UI to edit the stats of the attack, as well as having enough variables to allow the designer to customize the attack to their liking. In the first prototype, there are already a bunch of variables to tweak in order to change the attack's behavior, but we added many more later down the line. The attacks are displayed in lists, where one list of attacks is a chain of attack combos, like the 3-hit light attack combo for example. We started with a predetermined amount of lists, but later changed it to being an adjustable amount, so that it's more customizable. A lot of the work on the combat is to add new variables that gives us new ways to change attack behavior and to make the process of adding new attacks as easy as possible. While doing that though, we also added some juice on the way, like a hit effect, a screen shake, and a freeze frame when you hit something. Oh, and we also made it so you can actually kill stuff. We also added a dodge roll, although it was hard to tell at first without animations. Eventually we added some animations that, even though they're not entirely finished, gives a much better feel and more visual feedback to the combat. We also improved how the targeting of enemies is done and how the player moves between targets to make fighting multiple enemies feel good. Some new moves were also added, like a heavy attack, which is very much not done, and an attack to grapple to enemies, which took a few attempts to get right. But eventually, we got it feeling pretty good. Right now, we are planning and developing for a vertical slice. For those who don't know what a vertical slice is, it is a short segment of the game that demonstrates the core of the most important aspects of the game. Having a vertical slice is crucial in order to prove an idea and see if it's something that people actually like. And it also helps us get a clearer picture of how the rest of the game should be put together. In this vertical slice, there will be the very basics of movement and combat, a segment of a level that demonstrates both platforming and combat, and an environment that really exemplifies the extreme weather aspect of the game. We will also have a unique level mechanic that is connected to the extreme weather present in the level segment. The first level of the game, which the vertical slice will be a part of, will be set in a forest where a big industrial complex has been built, complete with a sawmill and a floodgate. While progressing through the level, the rain becomes more and more intense, and certain areas start to flood. However, you can also use the rain to your advantage, controlling it in certain ways, which we will show more of in the future. You will encounter the den of a big mutated bear-type creature, the Bearverine, which you will eventually have to fight as the boss of this level. But before making a more finished level though, we are making a bunch of prototype environments that are kinda like test levels that we use to experiment with and test out the core mechanics. We're making platforming segments to try some concepts of platforming challenges to see what works and what doesn't, so that when we eventually create a more finished level, it is actually fun. It's been a while since the first devlog was posted, but as it turns out, making a game takes a lot of time. There has also been a lot that we've done outside of the game that takes a lot of time as well, like business development in order to actually start a company for making the game, and all the marketing stuff like, for example, writing the script for a devlog. Juggling the creation of further devlogs with the development of the game is going to be hard going forward, which means that devlogs will most likely be somewhat far between. If you would rather see smaller devlogs but posted more frequently, you can always tell us in the comments. Well, that's it for this devlog. If you are interested in the game we're making and want to see more of its development, leave a like. If you want to see other stuff from us, check out the video description. Alright, see ya!